I bring you greetings from the Borderlands Unitarian Church in Amado, Arizona, land of the Tohono O'odham and the Pascua Yaqui. I'm going to first give you a little history of the movement of the Samaritans. Tucson, Arizona was the center and the foundation of the sanctuary movement in the 1980s. During the civil wars in Central America, when many people were fleeing to the United States, to Mexico also, and to the United States because of those civil wars. But Tucson has also been at the same church, which is Southside Presbyterian Church in Tucson, also been the foundation of an organization called Humane Borders, which was the first to be putting water in the desert for those who were dying of thirst. Then No More Deaths, who established a camp in the desert for respite and medical aid. And then the Samaritans. These groups formed in the early 2000s as we became aware of the numbers of deaths of those crossing our desert. At this point, the number of human remains found, and that is different than deaths. We know that the deaths are much more than those we find. At this point, human remains found since 1999 is at 4,200. As the 1994, the anti-crime bill signed by Bill Clinton, one of the border policies in there is called prevention through deterrence. And that's a rather naive understanding that you're going to prevent migrants coming by making the journey as difficult as possible and knowing they passed this, knowing that it would mean that people would die. And they felt that people dying would deter other people from coming. Because it pushed more and more people into the desert by closing off all of the urban centers to people who wanted to cross the border. The body count rose abruptly after that passing of that bill, and No More Deaths established their medical tent in the mountains near the town of Arivaca. So the Samaritan work is to prevent deaths in the desert, first of all by placing water and food on migrant trails. It was so obvious, the migrant trails were so obvious that when I first joined Samaritans, I could look on Google Maps and I could show you the human trails. They're different from the cattle patterns, because cattle will stop at a fence and stay on their ranch, and the human trails just keep going. So we conduct searches on forest roads with four-wheel drive. I love driving a four-wheel drive. But we look for lost and injured people. But small groups of asylum seekers began to appear as the wall grew. And they did come through gaps in the border wall. And there are gaps, or were gaps, because you have arroyos in the desert that need to flow. You just can't block those. There have been other areas where, knowing that there was erosion already occurring on the south side of the border, and they were fearing that the wall would fall, they needed to cut access so they could get machines and do remediation work on the other side. So the asylum seekers, which was kind of a new phenomenon, came right to the border wall to ask for asylum from the Border Patrol. They did not continue on into the mountains, into the desert. And many times they would wait for hours or even a day or two for Border Patrol to come and pick them up. So we began to go directly to the border wall to intercept them, to meet them, to give them water and food, and some semblance of shelter while they wait for Border Patrol. Someone has to meet their medical needs and even contact Border Patrol and tell them about problems that they have. A pregnant woman who's having some issues, people with injuries. But nothing that we have done is illegal. The humanitarian aid work is not illegal. You can give food, water, even shelter, a shower, a bed, and all of that is legal work. Humanitarian aid is legal. The things that are illegal are transporting people or harboring them in your house and lying about whether they're there or not. That's called harboring. So at the beginning, folks said, well, we're doing civil disobedience. And a rancher who worked with John Fife, who began the sanctuary movement, said, you're not doing civil disobedience. What you're doing is civil initiative. It's the legal right and the ethical responsibility of civil society to protect the victims of human rights violations when the government is the violator, and to hold the government accountable. And the government is a violator by closing so many doors to people that need to come and claim asylum. They are violating our asylum laws, international asylum laws, and our moral laws also. And I'm interested that Michael pointed out the first two principles of our 7 principles, because that's what I was also going to point out. That's our responsibility, are those two principles. So we're going to look at and I appreciate that the theme is their wild and precious lives. And I think of that meaning both the migrants, the people we encounter at the border, and those of us who work there. And the sense of those wild and precious lives is very strong when you're there. It's very strong. Baba Kivri is the sacred mountain for the Tohono O'odham Nation. This mountain range right there is their eastern boundary, and beyond that is the nation, the size of the state of Connecticut. It illustrates the rugged mountainous area of our border. And an example of the difficulties that are faced by migrants in the border is last February, last February, not this February, there was a young Guatemalan who was lost on one of the ridges up there. And he called 911. He knew to call 911. He had his cell phone and asked for help. No one came. He called again later in the day. He had an injured foot. He could not walk any longer. He had no water. And no one came. And he finally called his mother in Guatemala, gave her his coordinates, and she started calling people up here, and she called Samaritans. And the Samaritans began to call 911, call Border Patrol, you call the U.S. Forest Service, you call the Sheriff's Department, and they say, oh, yeah, we'll send somebody. Nobody came. Nobody went. After 3 days of these calls back and forth, I think there were 40 calls, the Samaritans in Tucson decided to mount a search for this young man. Helicopters even went over and sighted him, but no Border Patrol went to find him. It's very sad. When the Samaritans got to the bottom where they parked their car, there was a Border Patrol there. And they said, "Are you coming with us?" And he said, "No, I was told to stay right here." So they went up and brought this man down the mountain. It took several hours. That's the work that we do when it's needed. Whoops.
He survived.
He did survive, and he's back in Guatemala. And he called later. This wall is 30 feet tall with a flat metal plate at the bottom so that it discourages climbing. Once you get to the top, you can't do that. There's no way in this picture to sense the dominating size of 30 feet of wall until you're standing right by it. And 30 feet has been researched as the height at which you begin to lose your equilibrium. The former wall was 18 feet high. But in the wisdom of government spending money, they took down the 18-foot wall and put up the 30-foot wall. So there's a lot of money there. From the little town of Sassabee, where the Border Patrol station is, to the mountain that you see, it's 5 miles. And then beyond that mountain, it's another 15 miles to the end of the wall. In that 20-mile stretch, there's only mountains and desert and mesquite and cactus and rocks and one bit of a ranch that's nearby. Other than that, there's nothing but these very steep roads. We're getting close to the mountain that's called Fresnel Peak. And you can see how they worked to dynamite that mountain so they could continue the wall through the mountain. But it's definitely too high. And when you get on the other side of this big scar, there's just a severe drop. But a lot of money and work went into blowing up this mountain. This is the absolute violence of our seventh principle of the interdependent web of all. Because of this wall and the 4-inch openings that are left there, what we are blocking is the normal movement of animals, mountain lion, jaguar, ocelot, javelina, bobcat, deer, antelope, fox, turtles, and some birds and butterflies. So we're making separate gene pools by preventing their movement, their natural movement. And the cost of the construction and repair of this wall continues with remediation, as I said, and the constant welding of repairs where the cartel will cut through the wall in order to get people through the wall, and then the welders will come and repair the holes. The welders have secure jobs. But the wall is a money pit. It likes to do two. After you go around Fresnel Peak, we can view the long road that goes further east for another 15 miles. You might be able to see migrants walking down that hill. And it's very small, but at the very, very end, if you were very close, you would still see people on the highest hill there. And that's how we meet the people, just walking along the wall. The hills are very, very frequent, and they are at a 20% grade. Anybody that drives a truck would know how steep that is. The people are brought to the wall by the cartels. They're brought to the end of the wall. And cartels are really not, in the past, it was like a family business to get people across. Now it's practically international organized crime. You really have to see it that way. They're making billions of dollars because we are limiting the way that people can come legally. So we are working to put money into the hands of the cartels. During the past administration, the visa numbers were cut drastically, and the refugee quotas and programs settling refugees were slashed, and they have not recovered fully yet. This was a January snowstorm, and the Border Patrol refused to come after many frantic calls were made to the Border Patrol to come. But they said they can't get out there on those roads when they're wet because their vans are only two-wheel drive. So you build a four-wheel drive road, and they don't have the equipment to serve that road. But that night, because it was so dangerous for the people out there, then the humanitarians, the Samaritans, and No More Deaths began to put people in their cars and move them to the Sassabee Border Patrol base, which was illegal. It's a felony to take people in your car who are undocumented and not in the control of Border Patrol. It's a felony to move them. However, our argument from our lawyer is that we are not furthering their presence in the United States. We are taking them to law enforcement. They've threatened us with arrest a zillion times, and we smile because we know that they won't win that argument. And this was another cold, rainy day, and they're huddled in those Mylar blankets. And there are other crossers, of course, who are not seeking asylum, and they may have a prior history of a deportation, and they would be thrown out immediately. They may be bringing drugs. They may, like the woman, be just hunting for family. They just want to get together with family. But crossing a border is not a death sentence, and that's why we're there. The militia who come down say, of course, that they're defending our sovereignty. They're defending the border, but they don't do anything. They stand around in their military outfits and their big guns and sometimes faces masks. And there's nothing they can do, actually, to stop the cartels. And nothing, they only do try to intimidate us and to report to their followers that we are facilitating the invasion, that we are aiding and abetting the cartels, that we are aiding and trafficking children. And that one of the reasons that we want all these people to come across the borders is so that in the next election, they will vote for Biden. So these folks do come with press badges, and they come with their cameras rolling to challenge you, and they name the Unitarian Church in Tucson. They name the Catholic Community Services. They name the Samaritans as the folks who are doing illegal things. That is and can be dangerous. I mean, I imagine there could be someone like the Pizzagate fella who believed that Hillary Clinton was running a child trafficking ring in the bottom of McDonald's. So you never know, and he came with a gun. So you never know what kind of crazy people might take those words of the militia and the right-wing press to heart and try to do work there. We do know that some of the militia and even Border Patrol have slashed the water bottles we put in the desert, have destroyed structures that we've built for shelter of the migrants while they're waiting at the wall. But we are never armed as Samaritans. We are never armed. Oops, always. Whoop, why? I don't know if there's a secret spot. Whoa. Okay. Whew. There we go. So what we do at the border is try to meet the people. They're coming, maybe we're the first people they see that are not armed, that are not trying to hurt them. And we try to bring hope. And that's what I see in this father's eyes, is hope. We bring food, water, fruit, blankets, medical care, and hope. This was a wild day at the wall. I was not here. Yes?
Yes, the length of this particular wall, where does that start and where does it end?
So Richard, let's let her finish. We're past our time, but I really want you to hear the whole thing. We'll have time for questions and answers after the service. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. This was a terrible day of panic at the wall, and I don't know why the people were so panicked, but they arrived at a certain opening that had been closed. As you can see, there's a screen web there. And that particular opening was cut open and welded shut several times. The people on the other side were frantic for some reason, and they were screaming for help. There were babies. They were digging under the wall in the very hard dirt and had a very pregnant woman that they were trying to fashion a hammock to lift her over the top, which was extremely dangerous. So our Samaritans went ahead and connected their vehicle and pulled the wall open at that point to get them through. And this is Gail from Tucson, and she just got this little boy who was pushed through under the wall. There's a father with his daughter, gives you a sense of the steepness of the wall. There are so many families coming. I would say half of the people that come through are families with multiple children, and sometimes children arriving alone. Last week, a 5-year-old girl arrived alone on her way to family somewhere in the United States. And this happens, unfortunately, frequently. The cartels are battling each other throughout Mexico and right even up to where we are there. Sometimes we've heard the gunshots. They're fighting for control. If you arrest a real drug lord kingpin in Mexico, then all the underlings fight for power, and that's been happening. the little town of Sassby near us, which is on the other side of the wall, was actually completely emptied of people who fled because of the cartel fight. So a couple of people that we have encountered have come across with some gunshot wounds. And this is an 87-year-old woman who walked with her family from southern Mexico. Now, sometimes, of course, they take the bus, to a certain point, but they're always guided and directed by cartel. They're not free to go where they want to go. It's like a relay. You are moved from one system to another. This is just an odd shot. You're looking down the wall at a young man on the south side getting some first aid from a Samaritan on the north side, international first aid. And that's kind of at the east end of the wall and the distance we have to go back to help people. This is my friend Mike Wilson. Mike is a member of the Tohono O'odham Nation. He's just written a book called What Side Are You On?, which looks back at his experience of growing up Native in Arizona, and then became a Green Beret in the Army. But where he was stationed in the Army was in El Salvador during the 80s and during the repression of those governments which we supported. He has some baby shoes in his hand that he found at the wall. And knowing Mike's face very much, what I see is there is great, terrible sadness. It's an infant sock I found. Little baby's overalls. This is a camp. I think Diane took this picture. This is a camp we set up while people wait for the Border Patrol. They need some shelter. They need some food. They need a place to rest. If you're going to wait 12 hours or 2 days, you need a place to rest. We know that climate change leads to poverty, to economic upheaval, to political unrest, to violence, and to crime. And the military knew this about climate change 20 years ago, but their answer was militarization, which is what the wall is about. Yeah. So Michael really was there. Yeah. And that's me and another Samaritan, Charles Cameron, who helped building the structure. And all of it is donated. The tents, the food, the word went away. The flame, a little fire propane tank, and everything there is donated and brought by volunteers, by Samaritans. No help at all from the Border Patrol, no help at all from the U.S. Forest Service, no help at all from the sheriff, etc. And even though we're on forest land, we thought maybe they'd provide porta potties. No, we dig pit latrines for the people. And people light a campfire at night to keep warm. There's some shoes around. Lots of shoes. This is in Nogales, Sonora. This is on the Mexican side of the wall. This young man was Jose Antonio Elena Rodriguez, and he was shot in Mexico on the street by a Border Patrol agent who was in the United States behind the wall, up high, up along a wall that's higher than these walls, than this wall. The excuse was that Jose was throwing rocks at him. But I know from my friend who's a former Border Patrol agent, that's part of the training of Border Patrol agents to say, if they're involved in a shooting of an unarmed person, they were throwing rocks at me. That's part of their training. Jose Antonio was shot in the back 10 times. And the agent, of course, was acquitted. Migrants still wait on the Mexican side with hope that they will be let in. And in this one, they're waiting. Families just wait and sort of camp out right there, and local churches bring them food. And our lawyer was talking to them about what their rights are and what things may happen when they get through. This painting is in the refuge on the Mexican side. It's called Kino. Kino Border Initiative is a Jesuit-run service that helps those migrants that are stuck on the Mexican side figuring out what they're going to do next, or how they will be given permission to come through, whether they'll get a job. It's just a great confusing time. But this is a wonderful dining room and refuge for them to get some legal advice and to have some community, to have some hope, and get some care and support. So that's my last slide. And I would say, when you wonder, what can we do? What can we do? I would say learn everything you can about what's happening and tell the story. Thank you.